This video is about my first take at suggesting you optimal Neuvillette teams. The new Hydro 5-star character is a tricky one to build around for a couple reasons, and in this video I'll be showing you part of the results of my theory crafting. First of all, what makes him tricky? It's more than one thing. He has a passive that increases his charge attack multipliers depending on how many reactions have been triggered by allies, up to 3 different reactions. Not all the reactions work, but I'd rather not to go too in detail about kit info here. Second, he has an HP related passive that gives him buffs depending on how much health he has left. While he heals himself consistently by absorbing the orbs he creates, he'll also sacrifice an equal amount of HP by using his charge attacks, so pairing him with shielders or healers is optimal. Third, since his energy requirements are not trivial, and he basically needs to be played on a team without a second Hydro unit at Constellation 0 to maximize his first passive, his team rotations should be long enough to accommodate his requirements. Specifically, if rotations are longer than 24 seconds, he will be able to use his skill twice, and he'll generate enough particles to be easily manageable. Before we go further into the analysis, I'd remind you all to subscribe and leave a thumbs up if you enjoy my content. I really put a lot of effort into theory crafting, so any kind of support is much appreciated. While this premise could make him fit with virtually any unit, reality is a bit more restrictive. Specifically, he's an HP scaling unit, so his inability to take advantage of Bennett makes somebody like Zhongli a tough fit on the team, so he's going a completely different route compared to the Hydro units we've gotten in the past. There is, however, a character that recently received a substantial buff in terms of artifacts, that can benefit from long rotations and is also quite self-sufficient, and that character is Fischl. Fischl is a very unique character, because her elemental skill has a 25 seconds long cooldown. She can cast odds with both her burst and skill, but unless the rotation is 25 seconds long or longer, she'll only be able to cast odds once. However, since Neuvillette's rotations will have to be quite long by default, Fischl fits like a glove. Basically, Fischl potentially being able to maintain her damage uptime for more than 20 seconds a rotation puts her in a very unique spot among possible sub-DPS candidates for Neuvillette teams. Not only that, but the two of them will be able to generate electrocharge reactions at a pretty good frequency, which will enable anemo characters like Kazuha to deal even more damage through chain reactions, and on top of that, will also allow Fischl to get a lot of Ascension 4 procs. As a reminder, this can happen only if an electro-related reaction is triggered by a non-fielder. Electrocharge ownership will be passed to Neuvillette every time he reapplies Hydro while Electro is applied on opponents, granted the reaction is not on cooldown, and that will simultaneously trigger a Fischl Ascension 4 procs every time. Starting from this duo, I thought of a pretty straightforward team that also includes Kazuha and Zhongli. Out of these two, Kazuha is the unquestionable staple, while Zhongli is a bit more questionable, but we'll get to this later. Once I did this, the hard part was figuring out the exact rotation length and how to manage the abilities activations in the team optimally. In fact, Neuvillette can be even trickier to handle than what I made it look like before, because another factor is that his animation times are very long. In particular, his charge attacks can really take long if you take into account their complete uptime is of 3 seconds each, and their animation starter and ender will take 1 second minimum cumulatively. Basically, it's important to manage Neuvillette's uptime very carefully, in order to find the perfect balance between his actual damage windows and his support's abilities uptime. My first take was a 30 seconds long rotation that would allow him to use 4 charge attacks. I thought of this because he's able to create 12 orbs in total through 2 elemental skill and a burst, which amount to 4 powered up charge attacks in total. While this sounds great in theory, reality is much more disappointing. The problem here is that using 3 Neuvillette charge attacks in a row makes that damage window of his too long, and it just results in very half-assed results for Kazuha specifically, since he won't be able to maintain his uptime as long as he'd like to. Another thing to keep in mind is that between Zhongli's Crystallites and Fischl's Electrocharge procs from casting odds, maintaining Hydro application on enemies at the start might be hard. Note that you specifically need a Hydro Crystallites for Neuvillette's passive to gain a stack. This can be easily handled by using a Neuvillette Hydro normal attack at the start to allow Zhongli to activate Crystallites and Fischl to use odds and proc Electrocharge, before Neuvillette goes on field again to set up Hydro Gauge once more so Kazuha can swirl it. But going back to the previous issue, how can we adjust the rotation to make it better for all the characters involved? A first solution would be to simply split Neuvillette's damage windows in more parts. In fact, by swirling with Kazuha before Neuvillette uses his burst, it's possible to use a fully amped charge attack with him right away, meaning he won't need to use 3 in a row in the other window. Each damage window is preceded by a Kazuha swirl, so Neuvillette will be amplified for close to full uptime for the entirety of his moves. Another take would be to shorten the rotation entirely and remove Neuvillette's charge attack from the equation. This is very similar to the other, with the only difference there is no charge attack in the first part of the rotation. Basically, it trades some of Neuvillette's DPS for some of Kazuha and Fischl's DPS. While these two can thrive in long rotations since they can keep their damage going for long, 30 seconds long rotation or longer are too much even for them, so shortening the total rotation to a length they fit better in is a benefit for the team as a whole. The last solution is probably the craziest, a full 50 seconds long rotation. Don't let the rotation length scare you though, because these are basically the rotations from before with a few modifications and added on top of each other. Basically, this rotation takes advantage of the extra orbs created in the 27 seconds long rotation I've shown earlier. 2 skills and a burst can create enough orbs to amplify 4 charge attacks, but the 27 seconds rotation I've shown you before only uses 3. In short, this variant is just an opportunity to capitalize on more damage for Neuvillette, while keeping Fischl and Kazuha's DPS higher than the 31 seconds long rotation. Honestly, however, it's generally splitting hairs between these 3 rotations. All 3 manage to maintain Hydro resistance reduction uptime consistently for Neuvillette, which is what ultimately matters the most, since he's the hypercarry of the composition, so any negative damage variance for him has quite negative implications for the whole team. As a whole, this composition looks quite solid, and puts Neuvillette in an above average spot for carries in the game. What about the Zhongli thing though? Is there potential to replace him in the flex slot of the team? While Zhongli is a really strong shielder, by himself is not exactly bringing much offensively, as him holding the Tenacity of Middle-It set won't make a difference for Neuvillette, and the Petra set just won't have enough uptime to make a difference. Furthermore, since his shield lasts 20 seconds a rotation at most, his resistance reduction effect won't even have full uptime. Are the alternatives good, however? Someone I've seen getting a lot of support these days is Beidou. Beidou can technically sort of replace Zhongli's defensive utility through the shield her burst generates, but it's worth noting this shield is just a damage reduction effect, with some interruption resistance on top, so running her as the only defensive option will feel worse than running Xinqiu as the only defensive option. Not only that, while her and Fischl can combine for electro-resonance effect and lower Neuvillette's energy requirements slightly, putting 2 of the same element on the team will make Neuvillette lose a reaction stack compared to the Zhongli team. To contextualize how brutal this is, the damage loss for Neuvillette is almost as high as Beidou's entire damage contribution. Also, Beidou will be triggering Electrocharge from off-field, reducing the on-field procs from Neuvillette since the reaction has a cooldown. This reduces the amount of Ascension 4 procs Fischl will get as well. Overall, swapping in Beidou has some potential benefits, but mostly downsides. Another option would be Layla, a shielder who can stack up much better to Zhongli defensively, but just pales in comparison offensively. The issue is not even their personal contribution, but more so the elemental disruption Layla will cause on the team. By adding cryo application to the mix, she will usually disrupt the uptime of electrocharge on the team, and as such, she will almost completely negate Fischl Ascension 4 procs, and she will lower Kazuha's damage substantially. The trade-off isn't even what you would expect from the combination of Hydro and Cryo, since the freeze uptime won't even be super consistent due to the frequent electro application from Fischl causing superconduct. Overall, I currently see Zhongli as the best option, with Beidou being slightly lower offensively, while sadly also providing much worse defensive utility, and Layla just being dead last by a lot. I'm done for today. This was my first round of team analysis for Neuvillette. You can expect more to come in the next few days. Stay tuned!